Well, good morning. Does that sound like it's on back there? As far as the microphone? Does it? I can't really tell. I don't know how to control the volume. All I know is an on and off switch. That's all Marines can handle, like two things. Well, I want to tell you that it's an honor and a privilege to be here today, and that's because of who sits in these seats. I had the opportunity that Julie sent me the roster of who is coming and the companies you represent. And I began to look at one company at a time, looking at their website, looking at what you do. And there are words that came to mind. They all started with a P: protect, provide, promote, produce, propel. I just began to think about what you all do every day and how what you do actually touches our lives in so many different ways, either directly or indirectly. And though this is not going to be the main thrust of what I talk about today, I did want to say that we all have a responsibility in my mind as leaders to think about the bigger impact we make. I think a lot of times we get so tunnel vision in what we're doing day to day, we forget that larger influence that we have. For some of you around the world, for some of you within the nation, with some of you within the state. But we all have this wider influence, and I think it's key as leaders that we help our people see that bigger picture too, so that they see how their small part fits in with the whole. And one of the organizations that I've worked with is the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives Bureau. They wanted to start a leadership development program, and they came over to the Naval Academy, to the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership, where I worked, and we kind of worked with them on a leadership development program. And one of the things Julie didn't mention, I'll get it out right away. So I have, if you didn't hear about this before, I have 10 children. I do. That's why I look tired. I think that's flying across the country, actually, that makes that happen. I have 6 boys and 4 girls, ages 19 to 35. They're all mine. They're all with the same wife, and we know how it happens. So in case you're kind of wondering about that piece. But one of our children, our youngest one, raised a seeing eye dog, where you train it for about 16 months in basic obedience. You socialize it so it gets used to going into stores and public places. And then at the end of 16 months, you turn it to the professional trainers that then match that dog with someone who's blind and take that dog to the next level. And I happen to be talking to a couple of the ATF special agents about my youngest daughter and this dog she was raising. And they said, well, did you know that organization your daughter's working with, dogs that don't make that higher level training, they have a problem for some reason, often they become explosives dogs, where they go to find explosives before obviously they detonate. So they said, as a matter of fact, why don't you come over to the training facility where we train these explosive dogs? So my wife, my daughter, and I, we go over to Front Royal, Virginia, to the ATF's training facility. And they bring in a new crop of dogs each kind of couple of months. And this was a brand new group. And they only use Labrador Retrievers. They used to use Labs and German Shepherds. There's a great YouTube video that shows a Lab eating and a German Shepherd eating. The Lab inhales food, the German Shepherd actually eats food normally. And they said, we don't use German Shepherds anymore because we use treating to train the dog, and they actually get full. Labradors never do. We can continue to feed them forever, and they'll keep doing what they have to do. So there are these cute little black Labs that come out of this area, and they have 10 cans, coffee cans, 5 on each side. And this is their first day, these black Labs. And they have a little bit of explosive residue in just one of the cans in the row that the 2 Labs go down. And as soon as that little Lab, they see that they're smelling it a little differently than the other cans, they'll immediately treat it. And that's the can that has the explosives in it. So anyway, they're showing us how they do all this training. And then the head of the of the facility says to me as these labs are coming through, "What do you see when you watch that?" I said, "It's amazing training. I mean, I see these cute black labs." He says, "That's not what I see." He says, "When I watch what we do every day, I see the faces of hundreds of people whose lives we've saved because those dogs do their job." And when I walked away from there, I was inspired. It's not just about little black labs. It's about those people and the impact it has on them. And that's what, as the leader, he saw. It's just a great reminder to me that we have to be about that. And what you all do every day has this larger impact. And our people have to sense that and know that to motivate them for their daily tasks. But that's not actually what I'm going to mainly talk about today. But before I get into that subject, I do want to tell you one story. And because we have a large family, we're always attuned to big family stories. So there was a Marine Corps friend of mine who was married and had 6 children, all under the age of 12. So a very young family. And they were transferring from Camp Pendleton, California, which is near San Diego, all the way to Germany, where he had a new assignment in the U.S. European Command. So he had to go first to get his job started, and his wife was now responsible for getting these 6 very small children from San Diego to Germany. The big day arrived. He's in Germany. The military will pay for your family to travel, but they don't give you like a nanny or a helper. You're on your own. So she drives with those 6 children early in the morning, San Diego to Los Angeles, flies Los Angeles to Baltimore, changes planes with all of them, flies from Baltimore to Frankfurt, Germany. So that's like a 27-hour travel extravaganza that she's just been on with these children. And she comes into Customs and Immigration. Now, if you come in as a military family into Germany in Customs and Immigration, there's always going to be a German customs official and a U.S. military policeman to ease the entrance of the military family. So sure enough, she comes in. She's dragging 2 silver pallets stacked with luggage, and in tow are these 6 children. By this time, tired, angry, disheveled. And she's bringing them into Customs and Immigration. And this, I think she told us his name was Sergeant Jackson. U.S. Army. Sergeant Jackson steps forward, says, "Ma'am, I'd like to welcome you to Germany." He starts getting ready to give his pitch that he always gives, and he stops. And he says, "Ma'am, is this all your luggage?" She says, "Yes, it's all my luggage." "Are these all your children?" She says, "Yes, they're all my children." He says, "Well, I don't want to delay your entry into Germany, but I need to ask you the same questions I ask everyone else. Are you carrying any illegal drugs, alcohol, knives, or guns?" She says, "Sir, if I had any of those, I would have used them already." So we've had a couple of trips like that. We normally travel in a 15-passenger van. That's how you get a big family around. But coming out here to Portland was not one of those trips. Southwest Airlines, got to pick my own seat and got a rental car, went into downtown Portland. It was awesome. But there are days that I remember those. But you know what? Whether it's parenting or working in the corporate world or in the military, it always comes down to the basics. It always comes down to the fundamentals. To me, great organizations, great military units, great athletic teams, they're always great at the fundamentals. They figure out what the fundamentals are of their business, and they do those things well every single day. It doesn't mean that you don't pay attention to new techniques or new strategies, but the best always come back to those basics and keep executing those basics. I've been around as a coach in the lacrosse world. I know lacrosse has not taken Oregon by storm yet, but it's coming. I looked up last night, there's 22 high schools in Oregon that are playing boys lacrosse and even more that have a girls program. There's a Division I women's lacrosse team, the University of Oregon. There's 5 men's club lacrosse teams, so it's coming. But I've been around lacrosse for a long time, and I've coached a lot. And what I find is the great lacrosse teams are great at the fundamentals. It's not having a big, fancy, thick playbook. It's about learning the fundamentals and keeping doing those things every single day. I actually believe that's true for leaders as well. If we're going to be extraordinary leaders, we've got to do the fundamentals right every single day and be consistent in that so people see that consistency. The question, I think, sometimes becomes, what are the fundamentals of leadership? It's a pretty complex undertaking when you're trying to lead other people, because people are complex and different. And sometimes there's a struggle to figure out how to move them forward. Well, I was confronted with that question by one of my sons. So my second oldest child, who's our oldest boy, Arthur, he went to college on a football scholarship. He was playing football his first 2 years, and then he hit that point like many college football players do, and he said, I don't think I'm going to the NFL. So I probably should actually think about what I'm going to do next. Good thinking, son. So in our family, we talk a lot about service. It doesn't have to be in the military. Service is all around, like what you do every day. That's part of service. Finding something that has a bigger mission than just all about you. So my son looked around and he decided he was going to be part of, at that college, the Army ROTC program, Reserve Officer Training Corps. So he would graduate, he'd get a Bachelor of Science degree, he'd get a commission in the U.S. Army, and he'd go off. So in 2006, in May, he graduates from college, gets his degree, now he's a second lieutenant, U.S. Army. And he finds out he's going to be assigned to the 9th Engineer Battalion in Schweinfurt, Germany. So my son gets a map out of Germany, and he says, Dad, look at this. This is where I'm going first. Schweinfurt, beautiful. Travel around Europe. I can't believe this is my first assignment. I said, it looks great. You may want to just call them and ask them how they're planning on using you. So he calls them up, and they say, we're so glad you called, because actually the 9th Engineer Battalion is not in Schweinfurt, Germany right now. It's actually in Ramadi, Iraq. And we've just fired a platoon leader, and as soon as we can get you, we're gonna put you into the fight. So my son got off the phone a little more sobered than we said, look at Schweinfurt. But what I knew that he didn't know is that the two most dangerous places in Iraq at that time period were Fallujah and Ramadi, where he was going to be going. So the time comes, he's getting ready to fly out of Baltimore. So son and dad were together. He's going to go through security. He turns to me about 5 minutes before he's got to go in. And he says, hey, Dad, we've talked a lot about leadership over the years. Could you do a quick summary of this before I go do this? Thought, great. So I got 5 minutes to figure out how to tell my son what it's all about as a leader. So I'm scanning my brain as to what it is I'm going to tell him. And then all of a sudden it came to me that when I got ready to leave the U.S. Naval Academy in 1978 and go into the Marine Corps, I had a mentor of mine, a guy named Tom Hemingway. Tom was a Citadel graduate from South Carolina. He was much more senior than I was. He had been in the Marine Corps almost 20 years, and he had entered into the Marine Corps in the late 1950s. So Tom had taken an interest in me, and Tom had a story to tell me before I went into the service. And I realized that's a story I needed to tell my son. The story is that when Tom came into the Marine Corps in the late 1950s, he found out about the person that was going to be his right-hand man. We call it a platoon sergeant in the Marine Corps. So you got a platoon commander who's a commissioned officer, typically young, inexperienced, and your platoon sergeant is subordinate to you, but typically a little bit more experienced, a little bit older. They'll help guide you. But he finds out, taking this platoon in the late 1950s, that his platoon sergeant had fought in the Pacific theater of World War II, had fought at the Battle of Guadalcanal, had fought at the Battle of Okinawa, had stayed in the Marine Corps, fought in the Korean War, the Incheon Landing, the Chosin Reservoir, where the Marines had 15 Chinese Communist divisions come into the fight, and they had a single division trying to control this area. I mean, he had been through it all, and had been in the Marine Corps a long time. So Tom shows up, And he decides, I'm going to get this over with on the first day. So he goes up to this experienced Marine and says, I got to tell you, I've heard about your background. Could I just tell you I stand in awe of you? Could I tell you my background? I went to college for 4 years. I went to the basic school at Quantico, Virginia for 6 months to learn how to be an officer. And now I'm your leader. Could you actually tell me why you would follow me? I thought, wow, that's a gutsy question to ask on day one to the person who works for you. Why would you follow me? But it's a reasonable question. And this big old, he's called a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps, this big old gunny looks at this young lieutenant, says, Lieutenant, there's only 3 questions we're going to ask about you. Do you know your job, or are you striving hard to learn it? That's the first question we're going to ask about you. Do you know your job, or are you striving hard to learn it? We know you don't know very much right now. That doesn't bother us, but we're going to be watching you. Do you study? Do you learn? Do you ask questions? Do you listen well? Do you try? Are you willing to fail and then pick yourself back up? And then when you think you know it all, you don't stop there. You keep growing. So that's the first question we're going to ask about you. Do you know your job, or you're striving hard to learn it? The second question we're going to ask is, will you make the hard but right decision, even if it costs you personally? Will you make the hard but right decision, even if it costs you personally? Are you a leader of integrity? Can we trust you? Are you a person of your word? Do you have consistent alignment of your values, your words, and your actions? That's the second question we're going to ask about you. The third question we're going to ask about you is, do you care as much about us, this platoon, as you care about yourself? Because we know you actually care about yourself. That's the default of all human beings. We're number one. But what we want to know is, are you going to care about every single one of us? Not just the ones you happen to connect with. Oh, I'm from New York, you're from New York, or hey, I like gardening, you like gardening, or you like this kind of book. No, everybody, even the ones that are hard to like, let alone love, you got to care about them. Those are 3 questions we're going to ask about you. You answer those right, we're going to follow you, I guarantee it. Do you know your job? Are you striving hard to learn it? Will you make the hard but right decision, even if it costs you personally? And do you care as much about us as you care about yourself? So Tom wanted to summarize that for me so I would remember it. He said those are the 3 C's of leadership. Those are the fundamentals. Competence answers the first question. Courage answers the second question. Not just physical courage, but moral courage. And compassion answers the third. Competence, courage, compassion. So I told that story to my son before he got on the plane. He flew to Iraq. I'd hear from him in about 3 weeks. I got an email from him. Now, when I used to deploy and go places, you wrote letters. But now, even in the combat zone, you can write emails. So I get an email from him. I'm kind of a traditionalist, so I always look at the subject line. There's no subject line. I thought, okay, what kind of email is this? Then I looked at the body. There's nothing in the body. So now I'm getting a little frustrated, and then I see, wait a minute, aha, there's an attachment. So I click on the attachment. There's no explanation to it. There's just a picture of his cot that he would sleep on with an index card pinned to it that had 3 C's on it: competence, courage, compassion. Now, he'd have multiple combat tours there. He'd be highly decorated for what he did. Is that because I told him that little story before he got on the plane? I don't think so. I think he had that ingrained in him as he grew up in our family, that it is all about those 3 elements. If you're going to lead, whether it's a Boy Scout troop or an athletic team or a corporation, competence, courage, compassion. I personally believe those are the 3 questions all the people who work for us, whether they're conscious of it or not, are asking about us every day. Is this person competent? Is this person courageous? Is this person compassionate? I've been at the Naval Academy in the leadership development side for about 15 years now. And we spend a lot of time talking about those first two C's, competence and character. We don't do enough talking about the last C, compassion. And most leader development programs don't. It's normally not part of it. Compassion is very rarely unpacked. Oh, we're told, yeah, you got to care about your people. Well, what does that mean? Why? What if I don't? What happens? I see people who don't seem to care about their people. They seem to do all right. So I think it's worth pausing for a moment and actually thinking about that last C. I was reminded of this when I was asked to talk to one of our large departments of the federal government, and it's not the Department of Defense. It was one of the other ones. And I was asked to talk about values, the importance of organizational values. So about 2 weeks before I'm going to talk to this senior executive group of this large department, I decided I probably should find out what their values are so I can kind of reference them when I talk to them. So I go to their website. I'm looking all over. I can't find any listing of values for this department. So I called the guy who asked me to speak, and I said, hey, I'm sure I missed it, but I don't see any values on your website. He said, yeah, we don't have. Oh, really? Okay. He said, that's why we want you to come talk about it. Okay, well, I mean, have you thought about it a little bit? He said, yeah, actually, we're getting aggressive with this now. We've sent out a survey to the entire department, and we've had focus groups about values. I said, great, could you share with me anything you're learning? Long pause on the other end of the phone. He said, yeah, this isn't for attribution, right? That's what he said to me. That's why I don't tell you what department it is. And I said, yeah, I'm just curious. He said, mainly what we've been finding from the people is they'd like their boss to know their name, they'd like their boss to say good morning to them, and they'd like their boss to say thank you every once in a while. That's mainly what we're finding out. And we're missing the boat across the board. I thought, wow. So I ended up talking to them about values. But sometimes we can miss this compassion piece. And as a matter of fact, the more technical our area, the more we're at risk of not thinking about it because we keep pushing ahead with the analytics, the data, the information, the construction, the design. And we forget about the compassion part, but I believe that's key. You got to have the other two, but if you don't have that third leg of the stool, we're missing something. So I'd like us to actually go back to 1984. 1984, there's a #1 Billboard hit. This lady who sings this song, it rises to the top of the charts. She wins a Grammy Award, and it's called What's Love Got to Do with It? That was the name of the song. Anybody know who the artist was? Tina Turner. I did an imitation of Elvis Presley for the entire Naval Academy when I was a student at the Naval Academy. I do a very good Elvis Presley imitation. I actually can do Tina Turner as well, but I'm not going to do that because it's on film. But let me tell you what the chorus of that song is. What's love got to do with it? What's love but a secondhand emotion? What's love got to do with it? Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken? Who needs love? So if you talk to the majority of leaders out there, whatever their organization is, and you put the word leadership and love next to each other, most of them would say, what's love got to do with it? I work with a lot of leaders, corporate, nonprofit, educational, athletic, military. I'm going to tell you, most of them, if you put those two words up and ask them to talk about them, they will say, what's love got to do with it? But I've been around long enough that I know, I'm confident that it's impossible to be an extraordinary leader unless you have genuine concern for your people. It's impossible to be an extraordinary leader unless you have genuine concern for your people. Now, I'm not naive. You can build buildings, you can make money, you can develop products, you can win battles, you can win athletic contests, and not have a concern for your people. There's history to that. But I'm also convinced, looking at that history a little deeper, that those leaders were never as good as they could have been. And the people that they led were never as good as they could have been. When that connection is missing, the compassion piece, the love piece, strong word. But that genuine concern is what breaks from ordinary to extraordinary. That's pretty awesome. And I just want to share a little bit of the journey that I was on to figure this out, because I'm not sure it's natural. It may be for some people, but not for all of us. So as a young Marine officer, I read this story about a guy named General John Lejeune, who was the head of the Marine Corps in between World War I and World War II. There's a base named after him down in North Carolina. There's statues of him. If you ask any Marine, there's a couple in the audience, who are the 10 best leaders in history in the Marine Corps, Lejeune's name will always show up on that list. He was a great leader. He led the Marine Corps. But in World War I, he was a division commander. He had control of about 12,000 Marines and soldiers. And on November 11th, 1918, during World War I, his division is aligned along the Meuse River in France. Now that date might ring a bell from history. November 11th, 1918 is when World War I ends. On the 12th of November, the war is now done. Lejeune walks into his field hospital where he has wounded Marines and soldiers. And he sees a young Marine sergeant, an enlisted Marine, who has an amputated leg. And he walks up to that young man and he says, "Son, what happened to you?" He said, "Well, sir, yesterday we were given the mission to secure this bridge for friendly forces. And as we're going across the bridge, artillery fire came in, shrapnel occurred, went into my leg, and to save my life, they did what they did last night." Lejeune said, wait a minute. Did you say that happened yesterday, November 11th? Sergeant said, "Yes, sir." Did you know that the war was going to end any moment yesterday? Sergeant said, "Yes, sir. That was common knowledge on the battlefield." So General Lejeune looked in his eyes a little deeper and said, "So what caused you to go across that bridge knowing what you knew?" The sergeant said, "Well, sir, our battalion commander who was leading us, a young officer, because we had lost a lot of our senior people, this young officer said to us, gathered on the friendly side of the river, 'I've been given the mission to take that bridge. And I'm going across that bridge. And I expect all of you to come with me.'" General, that's what he told us. And I'm going to tell you this, General. We weren't going to let that young officer go across that bridge by himself. We loved him too much for that. And General Lejeune, when he would tell that story, would always follow it up with these words. "I've always felt that the incident I just narrated gives one a better understanding of the meaning and practice of leadership than all the books that have been written and all the speeches that have been given on the subject." I remember when I first read that, it was like, that's a pretty strong statement. So here's this Marine leader who says, you want to know what leadership's about? It's about love. It's about love between the leader and the led and the led and the leader. This absolute pact of loyalty that occurs because of compassion. That's what it's about. And I had to start thinking about that and go, okay, so why is that? Why would love be so critical if this is true? And I began to learn a couple things. Number one, I learned that leadership is about influence. That's what leaders do. We influence other people. We influence them to change their direction, their priorities, their behavior, their thoughts, all kinds of things. We influence other people. And people are not just influenced by a mind meld like Dr. Spock in Star Trek. It's not about analytics. It's about the heart. That's what causes people to do extraordinary things, when they are inspired at the heart. And they're not going to be inspired by the heart if there's not a channel that allows that to occur. And I became convinced that that channel was this genuine concern for my people. I've been to one of the most sophisticated planning schools the military offers. I can write operational plans. I can write strategic plans that will water your eyes. They're necessary, but they're not sufficient. It's not that piece of paper that moves someone into action. It's the heart that moves them into action. And if they're convinced, like that young sergeant was, that his leader loved him, and then he returned that, that's what caused him to do what he did, to make a sacrificial effort. So that's one thing I learned. Leadership is about influence, and influence comes from the heart, not from the mind. The second thing I've learned is that our people want to feel special and valuable. Everybody who works for you and me wants to think, we think, they're special and valuable. And the question is how do we show that? How do we show the people who follow us, you are special and valuable? Now, one of the things I've done ever since I led a long time ago is I always celebrate people's birthdays. Now, when I've led large organizations, I can't do it personally for everybody, but I'll take my top tier and do that. But I've just learned this is a time where I can make you feel special and valuable. Even the people who go, I don't care, it's my birthday. I don't want anybody to know. No, even those people like to be recognized on their birthday. They won't admit it, but they like it. So when I taught in the classroom at the Naval Academy, I would gather up the birth dates of my students. And when it came close to the time for their birthday, I'd get them a little leadership book. I'd have the whole class stand up, sing them happy birthday. I'd give them the book, kind of thank them for what they were doing. And they have to sometimes step back and go, wait a minute, how did he even know my birthday? And then they'd remember, okay, he collected that up with this info sheet. But he had to remember it. And then he had to connect it at the right time to actually, you begin to realize, no, this guy actually made some effort to wish you a happy birthday. Now that's just a technique. That doesn't guarantee anything. And you can do it mechanically and not care about the people. But somehow you got to get to the point where they really sense, no, I think you're special and valuable. The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was the head of the military, a guy named Admiral Mike Mullen, he was the #1 guy in the military, 4-star admiral. I knew him when he was a student, when I was a student at the Naval Academy, and he was a young officer. I was dating my wife at the time. She was my wife at the time. I was dating her, and then she became my wife. And he met her 2 times during that time where he was a young officer, I was a student, I was dating my wife, Misty. I didn't see him for another 20 years after I graduated. And we're at the Army-Navy game. And my wife and I are there getting ready to go to our seats. We're in this concourse area. And here comes Admiral Mullen with his entourage. He's a 4-star admiral. So he's got all kinds of people around him. They all have computers and books, and they look worried because they got to get him to the next place on time. So he happens to glance over towards the two of us. We're about 20 yards away from him. And I'm not about to say, hey, you remember me? Admiral Mullen. So I just look at him, he looks at me, and I'm standing next to my wife, and I say, he's now the head of the military. My wife, she doesn't care. So she just shrugged her shoulders, and Admiral Mullen turns the whole entourage towards us. And he comes over. They don't know who I am. The entourage doesn't. So they can't hand him a little card like, hey, this is Art Athens, and here's what you need to know about him. Here's his wife's name. No, he's on his own. So he comes right up to us, shakes my hand, he says a couple of nice things, and then he turns to my wife. He had met her twice 20 years ago. He says, Misty, you look terrific. I understand you have a big family. Now, I don't know how he knew that, but he said that. And he said, tell me about him. If you ever meet my wife and you utter those words, she will tell you about them, starting with Christina the oldest and going to Deborah the youngest in order with a lot of detail. She doesn't care you're the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She doesn't care where you have to go. He asked, she's going to tell. So I'm standing there, and he's listening. Like, not just listening, but intently listening. And by the time Misty gets to number 6, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable because I'm thinking he probably does have a place to go. But he keeps listening all the way down to Deborah. At the end of it, he says to my wife, "What a great family." He said, "You know, I got to run though because I'm late to get to talk to the Secretary of Defense." Okay. So did I feel special and valuable? Absolutely. Did my wife feel special and valuable? Absolutely. But it's because of him taking that effort to make us feel special and valuable. So I've learned leadership is about influence, and it comes from the heart. I've learned that our people want to feel special and valuable. I've learned that our people want to receive feedback in an atmosphere of genuine concern. They want to receive feedback in an atmosphere of genuine concern. Feedback is one of the most important things we do as leaders. We've got to tell people how they're doing, good, bad, indifferent. We've got to let them know. But if we're expecting change based on our feedback and our people don't think we really care, the chances that change is going to occur is very small. Even if there's threats, even if there's monetary stuff that goes with it, the chances that there'll be a real lasting change are very, very small. It's just the way it is. I watch this with young students at the Naval Academy who are walking to class. And they're just trying to get to class. You know, they're trying to get to their calculus class. They got a million things on their mind. They're in uniform, though. Their uniform's supposed to look nice all the time. But, you know, when they're just trying to get to the next class, that's not their main focus. And they'll be walking along, and some officer, typically a Marine, will be like 5 miles away from this poor kid. But they have laser rangefinders from their eyes where they see the guy's hat's not exactly in the right place. So they come out of nowhere. And this poor guy's just trying to get to class. And all of a sudden now someone's yelling at him about his hat, his uniform. And of course the student's having to stay at attention. And what's he thinking in his mind? Is he thinking or she's thinking, "Oh, I'm so glad this person took the effort to stop me, to make sure I looked exactly right. Actually, I wish that they would help me with my homework. Maybe I could give them my homework and they could make sure that..." No, that person's just saying, "How long is this going to last? I'm going to get out of here. Just let me go." There's no real exchange going on. There's no chance that this is going to have a lasting impression. And we do it all the time. These glancing blows that we give to people. People want to receive feedback in an atmosphere of genuine concern. And another thing I've learned is I've learned that our people want to believe they can come to us in their time of adversity. They want to believe deep inside that we care enough about them as leaders that they can come to us in their time of adversity. Now, they may not. Most of them might not. But deep inside, if we care about them, they're going to sense that. And they may just come to us. Now, we may have no solution for their adversity. We may not even have a suggestion, but we can be a listening ear. And I've learned over the years that if you lead 10 people, about 7 of them are going through adversity. At least. Now, if they told you what their adversity was, you'd go, "You call that adversity?" Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what our perception is. It matters what their perception is of their adversity. And again, they may not talk to you about it, but deep inside, if we really care about them, they're going to sense, this is a person I can come and at least maybe share a little bit about what I'm going through right now. I was the commandant at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, which is one of our 5 federal service academies. It's located in Kings Point, New York. I'd been there about 2 years. And I had a senior student come to me, asked to see me. So I bring him into the office and I have him sit down. I say, "How you doing?" He said, "Terrible, sir." Well, I'd been there 2 years. I kind of knew what terrible meant. Academics weren't going well, athletics weren't going well, finances weren't going well, there was a box I had of, hey, this is pretty much what it is. So I said, well, tell me more. What's not going well? He said, my dad was murdered on the streets of New York City last night. That was a Tuesday I was talking to him. That happened on Monday. So we spent about the next hour just chatting. And at the end of that time, he said, sir, my dad's going to have his memorial service here at the chapel aboard the Merchant Marine Academy. Would you and Mrs. Athens please come? I said, absolutely, we will be there. I didn't really know the family. I'd probably met the father one time while this young man was a student. But they were from, I think, New Jersey, if I remember, so they were close. So the day comes for the memorial service. It's going to start at 7 p.m. My wife Misty and I show up. It's about 5 minutes to 7. I'm looking around. I'm looking for the chaplains that would normally do something like this at the chapel. They're not there. I don't see anybody who looks officially religious who might be doing this. And at exactly 7 o'clock, this young man comes up to me and he says, sir, whenever you're ready to start. So I did say to him, start what? He said, well, sir, the memorial service. And I'm thinking in my mind, hey, bud, there's a big difference between saying, will you come to the memorial service and will you do the memorial? Come and do, not the same thing. But what was I going to do? So I did his memorial service. When that was done, my wife and I were walking back to our house, which was on the campus, and I said to Misty, I'm going to tell you, he didn't ask me to do this memorial service when we talked on Tuesday. She said, well, of course, he probably just, couldn't get it out. But somehow he trusted you enough that you would come through for him. Now, to this day, I don't know if that's true. I have no idea. I've never asked him, what were you thinking? But if they're convinced we care about them and their time of adversity comes, you might just get that kind of tasking. Maybe not that serious a tasking, but where they want to talk. And if you can help someone, one of your key people, walk through their adversity, again, not even being able to solve it, but just walk with them, you're going to have someone who will be loyal to you for the rest of their lives. Now, we don't do it for that return. We do it because we actually care about them. And I've learned those 4 things. Leadership is influence. Our people want to feel special and valuable. They want to receive feedback in an atmosphere of genuine concern. And they want to believe deep inside, as they face adversity, they could actually come to us and talk to us about it. So what are we supposed to do? Right? We're doers. So, okay, great, Athens. You're supposed to love your people. Could you give me a little hint? How are we going to do that? Oh, I got it. Come, what's today? Tuesday? Wednesday morning. We bring everybody together, key people. Wednesday morning, first thing. All right, everybody get in here. No, a little bit closer. Everyone get close. Hey, I just want to tell you, so everybody knows, everybody here, I love you all. I just want you to know, I love every single one of you. Okay, we got work to do. Let's get back. Let's get going. Just remember, though, I love you. No, you're not going to do that. Well, I hope you won't do that. And I've thought about that part, too. What do we do about this? What is love really about when it comes to the organizational setting? And I think it comes down to 2 things. One is an attribute, and one is an action. If we are going to love our people, and we're convinced that compassion is a key leg of this 3-legged stool of competence, courage, and compassion, I think it does come down to an attribute and an action. The attribute is the attribute of humility. Humility. Can't be about us. Now, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, when I say humility, I do not believe humility is a weakness. I don't believe it means people walk all over us or we don't hold people to high standards. I think a guy named C.S. Lewis, who was a British author, got it right. He said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. It's not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. The first part is confidence. We should have confidence. The second part, though, is where our focus is. Is it primarily on me, or is it primarily out there? And I've always pictured a spectrum that goes from healthy humility to unhealthy arrogance. And we're somewhere on that spectrum. Every single one of us is somewhere on that spectrum. And on the unhealthy arrogance side, it's about selfish ambition and vain conceit. It's all about us. On the other hand, the healthy humility side is where we consider others more important than ourselves. And we look out for others' interests, not just our own interests. Two sides of the spectrum. And if we don't get this right, we will not really love our people. We can fake it. We can do things that sort of churn up, maybe, but it won't be real. And our people will eventually discover it, and they'll figure it out. I'd like to show the dichotomy between those two ends of the spectrum. This one, the unhealthy arrogance. So this one is a personal story. It's a little embarrassing, actually, but I'm going to tell it to you because it was a touchstone for my life. When I realized how impossible it is to care about others when you're wrapped up in yourself. It actually takes place quite a long time ago. And it doesn't mean it's the only incident in my life where I've been on the wrong end of the spectrum. I could tell you plenty of stories. But this one is one I remember very distinctly. So I was in 9th grade when this story started. I grew up on Long Island in New York, and I was a 3-sport athlete. My spring sport was baseball, which was my best sport. I'm going to talk about humility, but actually I was a really good baseball player. I was a pitcher. We had a very small house in New York, small backyard, but my dad had built a pitcher's mound and a home plate, right distance, so that I could pitch to him as often as possible, which I did a lot of. There's a book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell that talks about being an expert in your field. He says you got to have 10,000 hours. I had 10,000 hours at that mound with my dad. My dad was heavily invested in me, and his vision for me was to be on the mound, this is going to bother some of you depending on your allegiance, on the mound of Yankee Stadium someday as a New York Yankee. That's what his vision was for me. And things were going pretty well. But at the end of 9th grade, my baseball season has ended, and my high school is in the Long Island Lacrosse Championship. At that time, there were 3 hotbeds of lacrosse: Long Island, Baltimore, Maryland, and upstate New York. It had not found its way out west yet. This was a big deal, and my high school was in that championship. I had never seen a lacrosse game, even though it was the biggest sport at my school. And I thought, hey, I'm a baseball guy, but who cares? This is my high school. I'm going to cheer for them, going to root them on. This is awesome. At a college, Hofstra University, under the lights, AstroTurf Field, one of the few AstroTurf fields in the country at that time. And I'm watching this game under the lights. It's electric. The hitting, the movement of the ball, and everything else. And I decide, sitting in the stands, I got to play this sport. I don't know how I'm going to do it because it's the same time as baseball, but I got to play lacrosse. And then I realized the only way I'm going to do this is I got to drop baseball. So that means I got to tell my dad. Now, my dad was not just a New Yorker. He was a Greek New Yorker. My original last name is Athanasiadis. It was shortened to Athens when my grandparents came over to Ellis Island. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, but that's how I grew up. Greek flags, statutes, Dad knows everything. Every word is from the Greek. I mean, it was pretty intense. And if you're going to make a big decision in the home, you got to talk to Dad. So I go to Dad that night. I said, Dad, I know you've never seen a lacrosse game, but you would love it. And I made kind of a big decision. This next year, I'm going to drop baseball and start playing lacrosse. So my dad, in his best New York Greek ways, says, what are you talking about? I said, well, Dad, I know it's upsetting right now, but I think I can be good at this sport. Should have anticipated his next question. I didn't. His next question was, so what position are you going to play? I didn't even know the names of the positions on the field. And I knew I had to answer Dad. So I picture the field, and I realized there's one guy who's standing in front of the goal. And I thought to myself, they must call that person a goalie. Just a shot. So I say to Dad confidently, as if I've been thinking about it deeply, Dad, I'm going to be a goalie. He says, well, what do you know, baby? Dad, I don't know anything about it, but I promise you I will work hard. And then my dad said, that's Greek for, that's a stupid idea, but I'm going to still let you do it. That's what that meant. So I get a lacrosse ball, I get a lacrosse book, and I get a goalie stick for the summer. Because now I'm a goalie. I don't get to go back to Dad and say, Dad, I've been watching them do that. They shoot the ball like 90, 100 miles an hour at the goalie. I don't want to be a goalie. No, I told Dad that night, it's done. It's wrapped with a bow. So I'd go down to a local elementary school with a brick wall, and I put my little book out, and I kind of taught myself how to play goalie. So I play my fall, winter sport. Now it's the spring, go out for the junior varsity team, because in my era, 9th graders played freshman athletics, 10th graders played junior varsity, 11th and 12th played varsity. They didn't cross over, bring people up. I go out there, there's 3 other goalies on the junior varsity team, and I'm thinking, what? That's a lot of goalies. Now I realize this is the premier sport at my high school. These kids have been playing it since they were like 5. So I am one of the 4, and now it's our first scrimmage game, and they put up the depth chart for the first time. Shows where everybody kind of is in order by position. And there are the goalies. And there I am, number 4. So I'm thinking, man, Dad's going to not like this. And we go out to the scrimmage. I remember it was all 4s. 4-string goalie. I get put in the 4th quarter. 4 minutes left in the game. 4 shots taken at me in those 4 minutes. And 4 goals go in. So I stop, nothing. I come off the field pretty dejected, but my coach comes up to me, my junior varsity coach, and he says, hey, don't give up on yourself. You keep working at it. Okay. So by the first game, the real game, I'm the starting goalie. We go undefeated. I get selected as the MVP. I'm now in the newspaper. The spotlight's on me. Kind of like it. Sort of the cover of Sports Illustrated. I wasn't that far, but, the Sports Illustrated cover routine. It's all about me, strutting around. And then the varsity coach calls me into his office. Our season has ended. He says, hey, Art, the varsity's going into the playoffs. And I'm going to bring you up to the varsity for the playoffs. I got Jim as my starting goalie, too, to back him up at the varsity. But you're my number 2 guy. I like the way you play. Something happens to Jim, you're going in. So however large my head was before I went into that discussion, it was larger as I walked out. And I'm hoping students are going to come up to me and say, hey, Art, what did the coach want? No one comes up to me, so I have to go to people and go, hey, you want to know what the coach wanted? And they're like, no, not really. Well, let me tell you, I'm going up to the varsity. So now it gets passed around the school. There's more spotlight. It's more about me. I start pegging in that unhealthy arrogance direction. So I go out to that playoff game, strutting. About 1,000 some odd in the stands, looking. Got the varsity jersey on. I don't care about the game. I don't care about the team. I don't care about the coach. I care about me. And I care that all those people are watching me. That's what my focus was. So I go out, do my warm-ups, come to the sidelines. I'm barely paying attention to the game. And in the second quarter, this shot rockets into the starting goalie, and he crumples to the ground. And I'm thinking to myself, I can't believe this. I just started playing this game this year, and I'm about to go into a varsity playoff game because I'm number 2. And I remember the next thing I thought very distinctly, I hope everybody is watching. So I get all my stuff on. I'm partly out on the field. The coach attends to Jim, the starting goalie, who's writhing in pain on the ground. Jim's still writhing in pain as Coach Lippman, my coach, comes up to me. We're about this far from each other. And he goes, hey, Art, that shot hit Jim where it really hurts. Okay, Coach. Yeah, and Art, actually the shot cracked Jim's cup. And we need your cup. So he said, hey, a couple of you guys get around Art, so they get around me. And I reach down, get my cup, give it to Coach. He walks it out to Jim, who's now standing. And Jim puts my cup in, plays the rest of the game. We win the game. So the next day at school, all those people I was hoping were watching, they were all watching. Yeah. Because they said things like, hey, Art, we saw you didn't get in the game, but it looked like your Cup had a great game. Like, way to go. Yeah, I was humiliated. And I learned very distinctly what it was like to be on this side. And I learned something else, because goalies are leaders. Whether they're the captain or not, goalies are leaders. I couldn't care about the people. I couldn't care about that team that I was supposed to help lead, because it was all about me. If we are going to love our people, there's no way we can be on the wrong end of the spectrum. And most leaders are on the wrong end of the spectrum. Most leaders are on that arrogance side, not on the healthy humility side. And one of the reasons is because it's really hard. It's a battle to fight to be over here. But I want to tell you about a guy who did it right, and it wasn't me. It's actually a baseball pitcher, interestingly enough, something I never got to do. Doc Halladay, who pitched for the Philadelphia Phillies. In May of 2010, Doc, that's his nickname, Doc, his real name's Ray Halladay, Halliday. In May of 2010, he pitches a perfect game. That means nobody gets on base. Nobody walks, nobody gets a hit. Perfect game. Becomes the 20th Major League Baseball pitcher ever to throw a perfect game. That's a big deal. I happened to watch the interview of Doc Halladay after the game. The journalists were all trying to get him to talk about himself, but he didn't. All he talked about was the catcher. What a great job the catcher did in calling the pitches. Then he said, you see my first baseman who made that last out to save the perfect game? It was all about the team. I made a note of it mentally. And then in October 2010, Doc Halladay pitches a no-hitter in the Major League Baseball playoffs and becomes only the second pitcher in Major League Baseball history ever to pitch a no-hitter in the playoffs. Journalists come in after him, after the game, same thing, all about the team. So then I got curious about this guy. Started reading about him. I found out that after he pitched that perfect game, he bought a Swiss watch for everybody on the team. Every player, every manager, every bat boy, and then what I thought was particularly interesting, everybody in the front office. All the accountants, all the marketing people, the communication people, the secretaries, everybody got a Swiss watch from him. Then I found out what kind of Swiss watch it was. And then I found out what the cost of this watch was, which was about $1,000 a pop. Now we could all say, hey, yeah, well, if I made the kind of money that guy did, I'd be buying watches for everybody too. I don't know, would we? But he did. But then he put that watch in a box to present to each person. It had the date of the perfect game, and it had their name. I thought that was interesting because I probably would have put my name on the box, but he put their name on the box with the watch in it. And then he had an inscription on the top of the box, and it said this: "We did it together. Thanks, Doc Halladay." I thought, wow, there's someone who was a humble professional, very talented, very gifted, but it wasn't about him. And because of that, he had the undying loyalty of that entire organization, the entire community, because he was humble, which opened the door to allow him to love people selflessly. It wasn't about him at all. I was impressed by that. And if we're going to love people, we better drive ourselves in this direction, because it's awfully hard to really love people when it's about us. And if we could hook up little electrodes and draw out how much of our thinking every day is oriented on ourselves, I think we'd be surprised. It's a battle, a daily battle. You don't get to check this one off. Marines love to check things off. We have checklists for everything. Oh, humility? Got it, check. No, it doesn't work that way. It's every day as leaders, and the higher up we go, the more prestigious our job is, the more challenging it really is. All right, so I said that there was an attribute piece to this and there's an action piece. And the action piece is centered around the word sacrifice. Because if we are going to demonstrate love to people, it's demonstrated through sacrifice. I've been married 39 years. I tell my wife every morning, including this morning, I think you're beautiful. I'm so glad I'm married to you. I'm committed to you for a lifetime. Pretty nice of me, huh? Yeah. Well, those are good words. Those are probably helpful to, keep our marriage strong, but they're not sufficient. Because if my wife never sees any elements of sacrifice for me on her behalf, she can question all those nice words I'm saying. And I realize that it's not the gushy feeling of bringing the team together and telling the team I love you. It's the actions of sacrifice that convince people we actually care about them. And those sacrifices can show up in a lot of different ways. It could be our time, it could be resources, priorities, all kinds of things. But when I think about sacrifice, and I realize I tell, a fair number of military stories because that's a lot of my life. But when I was a young platoon commander, so my first command really within the Marine Corps, I had a lance corporal, which is 3 levels up in the enlisted side of the Marine Corps. Lance corporal is the title. Lance Corporal Matson. He was my worst Marine, by far. Didn't look good in uniform, didn't behave well, didn't know his job well, had terrible relationships within the platoon. But when I took that platoon, I had made the commitment I was going to love every single one of them. And that meant Lance Corporal Matson as well. So you might remember the Iranian hostage situation from a number of years ago. And there were a number of contingency plans put into play. The one that actually got executed, Desert One, obviously did not turn out very well. But my platoon was going to be part of one of the other options that ended up not being executed. We were in Yuma, Arizona, down in the southwest corner of Arizona. There's a Marine Corps air station there. And we were going to fly out on a Monday. Even if we weren't going to execute, we were going to pre-position in a certain place. And Lance Corporal Matson was already on what we call in the military leave, vacation, but we had arranged everything so he could be back Sunday night, so he'd be ready to go Monday, because we needed our full contingent of Marines. And at 10 o'clock at night on Sunday, I get a call from Lance Corporal Matson. The plan was for him to fly into Phoenix, which is about 3 hours from Yuma, get a taxi from the airport to the bus station, and then take the bus from Phoenix to Yuma, and everything would be great. So I get a call at 10 o'clock at night, Lance Corporal Matson. He always used to talk very fast, so he could always deny anything we said he said. So I hear this kind of quick blurb. So I want to get there Monday. I obviously don't want to do this. We could get a lot of trouble. I realize that. And so, I got into the plane okay, got the taxi over, then realized I don't have enough money for the bus ticket because I spent it on something else, and there's no way I'm going to be back by Monday. I hope that's not a problem. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, it is a big problem in the military. So he's going to miss movement on a contingency operation, which means he's going to get in a lot of trouble. And inside I knew, Athens, if you really love this guy, this is your chance to show it. So I said, well, Lance Corporal Matson, it's about 3 hours from Yuma to Phoenix. I'm going to drive up there, and I'm going to get you, and I'm going to drive you back. Dead silence on the other end of the phone. I think he had a big night planned in Phoenix that I probably ruined for him. So I drive up there. He's now at the bus station. I don't know where he was before, but he's now at the bus station because he had it timed about when I would show up. And I drive in, get Matson in the car, and now we start heading for Yuma. Now, if you've ever driven from Phoenix to Yuma, there's like nothing. There's no billboards like, to get a conversation going with someone you don't really know that well. Oh, look, a Holiday Inn. I've been to a Holiday Inn. I went to a Holiday Inn and wherever. You ever been to a Holiday, just to kind of get it. There's nothing. So you're just going to talk. And so I drove up 3 hours and I drove 3 hours back. That's 6 hours. I learned something about Lance Corporal Matson after that trip. No one had ever gone 6 minutes out of their way for that young man, let alone 6 hours. Over the next year, Lance Corporal Matson would become my best Marine, by far. Now, if we're going to sacrifice, we don't sacrifice with the expectation of something in return, then it's not sacrifice. I didn't go do that because I was thinking in the long run he's going to be the best Marine. I did it because I loved him. And I felt at that moment it was the right sacrifice to make. I did not go picking up my Marines all over the world. And people will ask me, well, how'd you know? How'd you know to do it that? There's no formula. You know that. There's no formula. But if you truly are humble and you love your people, you'll know that there'll be these opportunities that arise where we can sacrifice and demonstrate the love. I never told Lance Corporal Matson I loved him. Especially before that incident, I never told him I loved him because I was struggling to love him. It was the action that convinced him that I did. There's a football coach who's now, he does commentary every once in a while. He coached at Notre Dame at one point in time. His name was Lou Holtz. He coached a number of different colleges, but his kind of big one was at Notre Dame. He shows up when Notre Dame has losing seasons, and his job is to bring Notre Dame back up to prominence. So his very first year, his team has 4 wins and 5 losses, and they're going out here west to play USC, who at that time was number 1 in the nation. And Holtz, the whole day, is thinking about if we could just win this game, we'd be 5-5. We'd have 500, better than they've done in a long time. I'd get a lot of people off my back. The alumni, the athletic director, the Pope, everybody would be off my back so I can focus on Notre Dame football. So, playing USC, but they're really good. But it's the 4th quarter, very few minutes left in the game. USC is deep in their own territory, and they have to punt the ball to Notre Dame. And Holtz is thinking to himself, this is perfect. Like, even if it's a good punt, we'll have just enough time to bring it, drive it down, score, and they won't have time to come back. We're going to be 5-5. So he sends out his punt return team. A guy named Skip Holtz was on that team, his son. And Skip was on that punt return team. So Holtz gets ready for the punt. He watches the punt, and it's short, wobbly, better than he could have ever hoped for. And he's getting ready to just explode in excitement when he looks over and he sees a yellow penalty flag. And then he looks a little bit closer, and the USC punter is flat on his back, and there's a Notre Dame player completely covering him. And the ref is signaling roughing the kicker, which means there's been a penalty against the kicker. USC will retain possession of the ball, get an automatic first down, the game's done. And then he sees the number of that Notre Dame player getting off of the punter. And as Holtz tells the story, he says, so my wife's son is coming off the field. And he said, all I could think about was taking that young man and strangling him and kicking him and throwing him against the bench. I was so angry. And then I remembered something someone once told me, and that was sometimes people who need love the most deserve it the least. Sometimes people who need love the most deserve it the least. And as Skip got closer to his dad, Coach Holtz put his arms around him and said, it's okay. We'll come back. Lou Holtz says every eye of the Notre Dame football team was on that interaction. What was Coach Holtz going to say about this one? And because he sacrificed what he wanted to do something he actually didn't naturally want to do, Notre Dame would come back and win that game. They would then go on to win multiple national championships. And Lou Holtz says a lot of it had to do with that moment in time where I sacrificed my emotion to do what was better for that young man who happened to be my son, and everybody saw it. There was a guy named Josh McDowell when I was a student at the Naval Academy who was going around to college campuses talking about healthy relationships. This is not a new subject. It seems like it's new in the news, but it isn't. So this is back in this case in 1974. And he's going all around to these college campuses. And the name of his talk was Maximum Sex. That was the big title of his talk. But in little letters, it says it's not about sex at all. It's about true love. You know, it had the other explanation. But the big black letters said maximum sex. Now, when I went to the Naval Academy, it was an all-male institution the first 2 years I was there. And this was my first year there. So there are posters all over the Naval Academy. And Naval Academy midshipmen, they don't read the small print. They see the big print, maximum sex. So we had this auditorium that held about 2,000. The brigade is about 4,400. And normally these lecturers would come in and out, and there'd be like maybe 200 midshipmen. Well, just about the entire brigade was stuffed into this auditorium. And then, of course, Josh McDowell starts talking about real relationships that aren't based on sex at all, which disappointed probably most of the people. Okay, I'll admit I was there at the lecture as well, just so you know, I make that clear. But I'll never forget something he said. He said, see, there is love if. I'm going to love you if you behave a certain way. There's love because. I love you because you have this particular talent or you look this certain way. He said, true love is love in spite of. The Greek word for that is agape. It's this sacrificial love in spite of these flaws we all have and that we have working for us. We're still going to love you. That's sacrifice. And I think if we're going to really love our people and have compassion for them, it takes the attribute of humility and it takes the action of selfless love. Sacrifice. So I'm going to close with one final story, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. And to me, this story typifies the combination of humility and sacrifice. And I'll tell you up front, it's a Marine story. Okay, I got to start with a Marine story and end with a Marine story. There's a young guy by the name of Jason Dunham, D-U-N-H-A-M. He grew up in Scio, New York, which is upstate New York. He was born on November 10th, 1981. Now, the Marine Corps has a birthday, and that birthday is November 10th. That's when the Marine Corps was founded. So here's a kid who's got a birthday on November 10th. Didn't know anything about the Marine Corps, didn't know that was the Marine Corps birthday. But he ends up enlisting in the Marine Corps as a high school senior. So as soon as he graduates, he goes to boot camp down in Parris Island, South Carolina, and enters into the Marine Corps. That's in 2000. In April of 2004, he's now a corporal. He's raised 4 ranks in the Marine Corps, and he's a squad leader. He has responsibility for, in this case, 13 Marines. That's normally a sergeant, 1 rank above, but when you're short on your sergeants, you pull up the next folks, just like you all do, to find the person that can do the job. And he was one of those extraordinary young men. On April 14th, 2004, Corporal Dunham is on the Syrian-Iraq border with a checkpoint that he's responsible for with his squad of Marines. And his responsibility is that as convoys or vehicles would come up this road, they were to stop them, check them over, make sure there wasn't any contraband, and then move the vehicles through. So on the morning of the 14th of April, 2004, the battalion commander, who's his big boss, is pulling the convoy through that area. And they stop, they get looked at, and then they get sent on their way. Minutes after his commander's convoy moves up the road, he hears rocket-propelled grenade fire and small arms fire. And he puts the time distance together and he realizes that must be the convoy we just sent through that's now being ambushed. So he leaves a couple of his Marines at the checkpoint and he takes the majority of them, loads them up into 3 of the Humvees, those armored vehicles, and moves up to where he thinks this action is taking place. Sure enough, there are insurgents who are fighting against this battalion commander's convoy. They've set up an ambush. So as Dunham shows up, he gets his Marines out of their vehicles, and instead of going into the middle of the fight, he decides he's going to go around the side and to the rear to try to disrupt what's going on. So he gets out in front of his Marines, and they're walking with him. and they're now moving to the rear of the action that's taking place between the insurgents and this convoy. And as he's walking, he sees these 7 white vehicles, civilian vans, with their engines running. And he's sure that this must be the getaway vehicles for the insurgents once they decide to pull out. So he picks his pace up in front of his Marines and heads for one of those vans. And as he approaches one of the vans, another insurgent, who's not in that main fight, who's in the van, jumps out of the van and has a hand grenade in his hand. Now, 2 things have to happen for a hand grenade to go off. You have to pull a pin, and then you have to actually let it go so this hand grip separates. There's a delay, and then it'll explode, which gives you time to pull the pin, throw it, and it's not going to explode in your hand. So he sees this hand grenade in the insurgent's hand with the pin pulled, but the insurgent has a grip on it, so it's not going to go off. So Dunham grabs his hand, and they begin to wrestle. And the insurgent is able to break his hand free. And he rolls the grenade towards Dunham's Marines. Dunham pushes the insurgent off of him and begins to run towards that grenade, telling his Marines to get down on the ground. As he's running, he takes his helmet off, and as he approaches that grenade, he puts the helmet on top of that grenade and then lays his body on top of it. The grenade will explode. 7 days later, Corporal Dunham will die from his injuries. But not one of those Marines was injured or killed because of the action of that young guy. In January of 2007, the President of the United States presented the Medal of Honor, the highest award for bravery, to the Dunham family. The citation would read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his own life above and beyond the call of duty, the President of the United States presents the Medal of Honor to Corporal Jason Dunham, United States Marine Corps." And then it would describe the action that I just told. Every single member of his squad, those Marines he was responsible for, that he led, were all there at that ceremony. And they all said the same thing about Jason Dunham. It was never about him. Didn't matter where we were, it was never about him. It was always about us. It was always about the mission. It was always about serving others, but it wasn't about him. And the other thing that they said is that he was always sacrificing for us. Didn't matter whether we were back in the United States and he had a little extra food and he would give the food out, or whether he would take someone to the train station so that they could get out on vacation, or whatever the case may be, he was always sacrificing for others. So when he did what he did that day on the 14th of April, it actually didn't surprise us that much. Greater love hath no man than this, to give up his life for another. That didn't surprise us. Now, we're in this room, the chances we're going to have to fall on a grenade are pretty slim. But the truth is, we have grenades figuratively to fall on all the time for other people, the people that are counting on us for leadership. And they're looking at us to see whether, in fact, we actually love them. That's going to be demonstrated by a humility, going to be demonstrated towards sacrifice. And I think if you asked Corporal Jason Dunham, what does love have to do with leadership? He'd say it has everything to do with it. I think if you ask Lou Holtz, what does love have to do with leadership? He'd say everything. I think if you ask General John Lejeune, what does love have to do with leadership? He'd say it has everything to do with it. And I'm convinced if you ask any true extraordinary leader, what does love have to do with leadership? They would say it has everything to do with it. So, we need the competence. There's no doubt about that. We need the courage, the integrity, because without that, we're going to be in trouble. But when we miss that last leg, we are missing so much in developing ourselves as leaders, as well as bringing out the best of our people. But it's hard. It's hard to be humble. Marines have a bumper sticker that says that. When you're the finest, it's hard to be humble. I mean, we believe that. And it's hard to sacrifice because it costs. But when we do those things, I've seen it over and over again. Military units, athletic teams, nonprofit organizations on the front lines of disaster relief, and corporations. Makes all the difference in the world. That's how we move, in my opinion, to extraordinary. So, I have a few minutes to answer questions. Like, yeah, we don't really do that. You got any other suggestions? I do, but I will focus on love. Anything about leadership, the Naval Academy, ethics, I kind of cover this wide swath there. I've got other stories, but any questions I could answer that are related to today or anything that's on your mind. Since you're here, I know you got to get back and actually run things, so I don't want to hold you up unnecessarily, but I'd love to answer a question or two. Yes, sir. Matson.
We've all had people who were, at the TED 2020, you worked with, and were hoping you turn around, help them turn themselves around. It's really tough to do. That's a tough move. Can you give us a little bit more color? How did that guy go from last to first and repair those relationships with peers? That's a big turn.
Sure. So the question had to do with this turnaround, in this case, Lance Corporal Matson, but you've had Lance Corporal Matsons. I'm going to preface it first by saying there are some we can't turn around. I had to learn that. I came in as a Marine and I said, you know what? I don't care what the person is, I can turn anybody around. I'll get to Matson in a minute, but this was Lance Corporal Ballister, who happened to be from New York. So we had a connection. And I remember the first time he got in trouble, he went to his hearing where it's going to be decided what kind of punishment he's going to get. I was his direct leader, but he had higher level leaders there as well. And I said, you don't need to do anything to this guy. I got it. I'll turn this guy around, no problem. Well, everyone who had a lot more experience than I did, looked at me a little askew, but it was like, all right, well, let the lieutenant, figure it out. So I go outside with Lance Corporal Ballister, and Ballister's like, hey, thanks, sir. And I said, hey, look, buddy, we got the New York thing going. Hey, New York, but you need to turn around. No problem, sir. You got it. Okay, a week later, he's back in the same kind of hearing, in trouble again. And what the commander used to do is go from the most junior person to the most senior person on a recommendation. So everybody except me is saying this guy should be, squashed because he really needs to be punished. And once again, I say, I'm just about there with this guy. Let him off again. So they let him off again. About a week later, he's back in. And we went through the same thing coming out of the hearing. Hey, Ballister, New York, you got my back, we're all good. Yeah. So then at that third time, they're going down, well, what's your recommendation? And of course, they get to me, and everyone's like looking, and I go, yeah, I'd give him maximum punishment. And I ended up having to administratively discharge him from the Marine Corps because it was not a good fit. So that's one principle is we're not going to turn everybody around. The second one, though, is how does this development continue to happen? And I think I learned some things about Matson that were also happening with some of the subordinate leaders, that they needed to be kind of retrained a little bit of how they need to work with Matson. So it wasn't just a one-man show. It was a process that actually occurred. But I'm convinced that drive, where he felt for the first time in his life, someone actually cared about him, it woke him up. I mean, it was dramatic. I don't have a whole lot of stories of being able to tell the dramatic change. I can talk about changes that are more gradual, and those more gradual times are more of the feedback pieces, where we spend time together sorting through and then setting clear expectations. Those are the ones that I see, go on as well. So very rarely is it dramatic, but I also always go back to everybody's not going to make it. No matter how much we love them, all those kinds of things, there's still people the fit isn't there, and the best thing that they can do is move on. Yes, sir.
on an overall basis, it seems to me that a lot of this is almost the opposite of what the world tells you today. And let's just take Madsen, for instance. I'm sure there was some intuition, something you were listening to yourself. How do I help? And this must have popped into your head at some point in time and saying, I gotta go get this kid. How often are you listening to that and acting on it? Is that something that starts to become more natural? I mean, a lot of it. There's not many people that would have said, I gotta go get this kid. Or even if they heard that and say that, it's like, well, I can't spend 6 hours going to get
Sure.
this kid. So are you now acting on that? Is that what we're talking about now? We're hearing that intuition, we're listening to that intuition, and we're taking it as opposite day.
Sure. So number one, I'll agree with you that the idea of being compassionate towards our people is not necessarily the normal, hey, here's the main thing you need to know about leadership. That's why I'm saying we spend a lot of time training people in competence and character or courage, and we rarely talk about this compassion or love side. But I would say that the movement to do what I did with Madsen, number one, actually started by making a commitment that I was going to love this individual. And I think that when we have that kind of philosophy, I'll give another very specific example. It's very fresh on my mind. I have someone who works for me right now who is challenging at times, just personality-wise and a lot of other things. But when I came into the Stockdale Center and I met everybody, it was like, I'm committed, this person, just like the rest of them, I'm going to love this person. And without getting into a lot of details about it, it had to do with a legal challenge that this person had that I would have just rather have said, hey, you got yourself into that, you figure that out. But I'm convinced it was the commitment to love this person, and then this incident arises where I realize, well, no, this is an opportunity to be sacrificial towards this person, not with the intent that this person is going to change 180 degrees necessarily, but it's the right thing to do because I actually care. I will say that I pray a lot, so whatever intuition, that probably helps as I'm walking through the day. But it is coming from the heart. You know, if it's just analytical and we weigh things, very rarely will we sacrifice. Because when we weigh it, it doesn't make any sense to do. So we got to step back from the analytical a bit to get to the heart. And I believe it starts with the commitment to love. And then it's not like I'm, actively looking for every possible, where can I sacrifice for the next person? It becomes who we are. That's the type of leadership we're gonna supply to those who follow us. But if we don't start here with making the commitment to love and the humility, I'm not sure we ever really get to the sacrifice part. Another question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would assume that tough love factors into your philosophy. Can you kind of walk through how you find the balance between
Sure. Well, you probably should ask my 10 children what that looks like, because that's raising my children. There's tough love, there's gentle love. I remember one of my great, they're all great, but this particular great son who did something inappropriate. I'll give this scenario enough. I guess this is on tape, but it's within your organization, so he won't have to hear this again. But he was a football player, and it's not the one that went to Iraq. It's a different one. He's actually a law enforcement officer in Texas right now. But he was a pretty big deal football player, and during the summer, they would have the football players doing some painting and yard work and stuff like that, and a couple other players told him, hey, we don't really do all this stuff. We just write down the hours and we turn it in. Of course, I don't know this is going on, and I'm sure he didn't feel comfortable with that, but he went with the group, and all of a sudden it was discovered. And I get a call from the head coach, who I'd known pretty well because I'd done some leadership development with the team and the rest. And he said, I need to tell you what your son did. So am I just going to hug my son and say, hey, this is a time to sacrifice for you, I'm just going to let this go? I don't think so. So I was actually on travel. I came off of travel, canceled some things to be home, to confront him directly. We had a pretty strong conversation that went on at that point, but then it's the actions that follow. Okay, you're going to write a letter to the athletic director. You're going to write a letter to the president. You're going to write a letter to your team. You're going to get up in front of your team and you're going to tell them what happened and why it wasn't the right thing to, there were a bunch of consequences that went with it. I think it helped him as he has continued on through life of what integrity looks like. So tough love is there as well. When someone is, that's why I say that if we give feedback in an atmosphere of genuine concern, I'm convinced my son didn't think I was doing this just because I was angry. I was doing it because I cared about him. And that to me is the difference a lot of time on the tough love, where people are receiving it as just, you're just angry, and if you do the tough love thing, this is better for you, you're going to look better. But if I really care about the person, I think that tough love is going to turn out the right way. That sort of answer? But it's there, and I hug my children a lot, I tell them I love them and the rest, but when they need feedback and then some help on, so what do you do now? Okay, you made, what are you going to do about it? I told the head coach, I said, I will respect your decision. If you take him off the team, you're not going to get an argument from me. You need to know that, coach. And then we added extra stuff from what the coach even had, some community service and all kinds of stuff. Another question? Yes, sir.
You touched on this a second ago, but could you elaborate a little bit more on how you drive this philosophy down into your leadership ranks? Because we have 4,000 people
Sure.
around the world. Even if we're doing this well from a senior leadership team perspective, the rubber really meets the road.
Yep.
Many layers down.
Yeah. So, great question of how do you drive this down into the organization. Of course, the immediate thing is always, well, the top better be demonstrating it or you have no hope whatsoever. That alone's probably not going to do it. I actually think about a guy who used, since we're in, well, I guess that's in Seattle actually. I was going to say Starbucks. There are an awful lot of Starbucks around here. But a guy named Jim Donald came in as the CEO after Howard Schultz wanted to step down. Jim Donald had done a lot of work with Walmart and actually created the Walmart, super Walmart with the grocery piece. He had a grocery store background. And so Jim Donald comes into Starbucks. And one of the things he wanted to get across was the idea that we wanted to keep standardization but allow some creativity. And he told, I had him come talk to a group there at the Naval Academy. But there's one thing that I remember very distinctly with driving stuff down an organization, is that when he would hear a story that represented what they wanted, and this idea was creativity. If you take love, though, it would be the same thing. Looking for stories, he would immediately call his senior vice presidents, tell them the story, tell them to tell the district managers the story, tell the district managers to tell. In many ways, it's about demonstration and it's about storytelling. I think, and that's a whole nother subject, but how do you use stories to drive things during the organization? I'd be glad to come in and talk to your group about love. It'll have a small impact on a certain number of people. But the deeper one to keep it going is the example of the top levels and then using stories of example. This is what it looks like. And then every time the senior leadership goes and visits out to the places, it should be part of the discussion. How are you showing compassion? What does it look like down here? I got that one from working at NASA after the Space Shuttle Challenger accident as a Marine, and I watched Dr. Fletcher come in and turn NASA around. And it wasn't the love piece, it was this piece on people speaking up. But he would use the stories to infiltrate. He would, every time he went to one of the millions of NASA facilities, he was always asking about, hey, where are people tempted here? Where are people tempted to cut corners? Give me an example of someone speaking up and challenging. And then he would take those stories back and then he would spread them out. So it's example, storytelling, and then that spreading. That's about the best we can do, I think. One last question.
Yep, one last question.
And then I got to find Portland Airport, which I'm sure isn't too hard to find. One last question. It can be a short question. I can give a short answer to it. Please.
So, I heard you speak about integrity at the AV conference, and we're talking about love and leadership and stuff. What kinds of tricks are you using for that self-reflection piece? Because I think you can get busy and you go by the day and it goes by and you don't really have a chance to reflect on how you live these values or these concepts. So, how do you go about that?
Yeah, I actually do it every day. I try to start every single day by reflecting on what's important in life, where am I heading, how am I spending my time, how am I spending my resources, how am I doing on my faith, how am I doing in my leadership. All those, I literally do it every single morning because I feel it's that important. I haven't always done that. It's taken time to grow into that, and it probably started where I do it once a month, and then it became maybe every 2 weeks, and then it was down to every week, and now I guess I'm old enough that it's really a daily routine. But I really sense that that's absolutely critical. So if it's not every day, where are we taking that time to actually do that? I'm going to actually close with this story that relates directly to that. This is actually not a true story, since you asked about integrity. I got to say that up front. But in Alaska, there's a wood chopping competition that takes place. And they have local competitions until there's the national final. And the national final is that there's this large forest area where the trees have to be harvested anyway, where they take the 2 finalists who have competed in all these local competitions, shown their mettle in being able to chop down trees. And at sunrise, they send these 2 into the forest, and they have until sunset to chop down as many trees as they can. They drag the trees out, they weigh them. Whoever has the largest weight wins the contest. So one particular year, there's this large, bulky man, looks like a natural, and he's one of the competitors. And the second one looks more like me, slight, not huge, just kind of a regular guy. And the 2 of them, sunrise occurs, they go into the forest. The big, chunky guy is just chopping away. The other guy slowly, a couple of trees coming down here and there. But that big guy, I mean, he's doing it, and he's doing it. And they can see each other for a good part of the day, and eventually they can't see each other anymore. And then they bring all the trees in and they weigh them. And then this smaller guy has by far the larger weight, and he wins, gets the big trophy. So the big bulky guy comes over to him and says, "Hey, I got to congratulate you on that. But I got to ask you, look at me, look at you. How in the world did you win?" And as a matter of fact, as I watched us chopping, often I'd look over and you were sitting down beside a tree rather than chopping, and that happened a number of times. What was that all about? And the slighter man says, those were the times that I was sitting sharpening my sword, my axe. And some of us are just chopping, and we're not stepping back, and our axe is getting dull. And that's a problem for a leader. And it's really, I was going to show a cell phone. I don't have any cell phones on me. I only have these 10 things that Sean has put on me to do this filming or whatever. But the cell phones, the emails, all that stuff, that's a whole nother subject. But boy, we got to really watch it with those things, because they are going to take away from those times. We need to be stepping back, sharpening the axe. I want to say one last thing before I go. And it's back to those 2 black labs versus the faces of the people whose lives are being saved by those black dogs. I just encourage you to keep thinking about that, of how important what you do is. And I've gone through all the companies, and I've looked at all the websites, and I can tell you, you influence a whole lot of people. So don't get focused on the numbers. Don't get focused on the analytics. See the faces of all those people whose lives are better because of what you all do every day. And I'm not going to mention them by name, but there are companies that are here that have directly impacted me. And I'm grateful for that. So you have a great mission, but always circle back to, it's not enough to have the competence and courage. The compassion has to be there as well. God bless you, and thank you.